I want to cross back to Adelaide now, and the Australian Conservative Senator Cory Bernardi. Thanks for joining us, Cory. Just on this emerging debate over homosexuality and religion, and Bill Shorten basically throwing down the gauntlet to Scott Morrison, this would worry you, wouldn't it? The religious beliefs being dragged into a political debate in this way?
It does worry me, and I worry that that politics, both sides of politics, are not doing enough to protect and defend religious freedoms. We've seen a lot of lip service to it, a lot of jawboning to it, but in the end, Christianity in particular and the Judeo-Christian ethos underpins the way we interact in society. It underpins our way of life. It gives us Western civilization, and I don't think it should be used as a political weapon. Quite the contrary, we should be defending people's rights and people's freedoms. And as I made the point in respect to Israel Folau, Chris, that he has simply quoted from the best-selling book and the most widely printed book in the history of human civilization, and suddenly he's been condemned for it. I find that unusual, and the people who are condemning him are the people who generally don't believe it in any way. So why would they be bothered?
Well, it's extraordinary what we're seeing here from Labor. Let's leave the fringe groups out of it, but from the Labor Party, which only 6 years ago was in government and refused to legislate for same-sex marriage, for instance. Its two Prime Ministers, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, both saying that they believed in traditional marriage. Its gay frontbencher Penny Wong even saying that marriage was for a man and a woman, as they all voted against same-sex marriage. Now that that has been delivered, under a coalition government no less, they are attempting to use this as a hammer in which to defeat any opponent they like. If anybody creates any concerns or had voted against gay marriage, now suddenly they're to be exposed and mocked and pay a political price, much less now trying to tease out the Prime Minister on issues of sin and faith, which surely should remain private.
Well, I think they should remain private, and if people want to advocate for them publicly, that's their business. But ultimately, tradition, civilization, and some of the basic tenets about which this great country has been built have been weaponised by the identity politics of the left. They wouldn't dare do it to someone of the Muslim faith, but they will have a crack at people of the Christian faith. They wouldn't have a go at someone because they're an atheist or a Buddhist or anything else. So they're just weaponising things that are undermining I guess, some of the most important fundamentals of our communication and our community. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of communication, freedom of belief, because they want to bludgeon people in submission into some sort of quasi-economic unit on behalf of the government. And I just think this is really wrong, and that's why we advocate for a universal freedoms bill. We've introduced that into the Senate. We will do so again. Because if you do not defend freedom of religion, even religions I don't agree with, but if you do not defend that freedom, if you do not defend freedom of speech and freedom of thought, you don't have any freedoms in this country. And I will never give up that battle, and I'm happy to be joined in it by a number of other freedom crusaders in various different parties, including some of the major parties.
Well, is this the natural consequence of people in the public life not standing up strongly enough for Israel Folau? I mean, effectively, we've got the opposition leader now demanding to know whether or not the Prime Minister believes homosexuality is a sin.
Well, I wouldn't put it all at the foot of people's reaction to Israel Folau, but there are certain events that prick our conscience and that remind us, well, if they're going to go after one individual because of something that they believe, they might then come after us for another view. And so I'm always going to defend the principle rather than the tribe. If people on my side of politics, meaning the conservative side of politics, do the wrong thing, I'll be critical of them as well, because ultimately, unless you've got a framework upon which you're prepared to substantiate your views, you will fall for anything. And I think that's what's plaguing the Labor Party at the moment. We know Bill Shorten is as flexible as anything on his policy positions and his belief. We saw that with Kevin Rudd, and we know that with Julia Gillard as well. It's infected a little bit of the Liberal Party, but ultimately principle has to come first, because if we abandon it, the whole edifice upon which our political system and our cultural system has been erected will come crumbling down.
Well, this is where you're absolutely right. It is about principle, and it has to be applied to all religion and all freedom of speech. But There seems to be this never-ending march to close it down step by step. Now, we had a long and contentious national debate over same-sex marriage. There was a plebiscite, and eventually that was legislated. And now it seems to be going. The push is stepping on to other issues about demanding to know what people believe. I just wonder where all this ends, because obviously it'll relate to a whole lot of other issues and a whole lot of other beliefs in the end.
And Chris, those of us who opposed redefining marriage did warn that there were consequences. And it's not lost on us that some of those consequences are bearing fruit, even though they were denied at the time. And it's not lost on me either that those who so want to go after Israel Folau for quoting from the Bible, for breaching rugby's code or ethics or whatever it might be, are the same people who don't want to allow a school to get rid of a teacher, a Christian school to get rid of a teacher who doesn't live up to their own ethos or their expectations. That's prohibited, it's verboten, but if you're on the other side of the equation, it's okay. And this is where the tribalism of the left and the commitment to dismantling some of the principles that we have is really very, very dangerous. I thought 15 years ago the Greens were just a bunch of fringe kooks who would never catch on in mainstream society, and yet their policy agenda has infected Labor, it's infected some in the Liberals, it's climbing into prominence everywhere, and we can't afford to let that happen. It's just a new version of Marxism, and that doesn't work.
Is it just an accident that this issue seems to have arisen in the last week of the campaign?
I suspect not. You have to give Labor credit there. They're very focused on their research. Bill Shorten would know exactly where the potential weak links are, and he's just trying to push a few buttons to get the left back on his side, to get the momentum back with him. And it forces the government, of course, or the Prime Minister to react. But I have to give credit to the Prime Minister. He's never hidden his faith, but he hasn't brought it into the public square in a manner in which others might seek to. He's a man of great integrity, and I think he's campaigned pretty well on this, and that's caused a bit of desperation in the Shorten ranks, I suspect.
I've got to say that in the final leaders' debate, when the issue of religious freedom and freedom of speech was raised in the context of Israel Folau, I thought both Bill Shorten and Scott Morrison were impressive, and they seem to understand the balancing rights here that we need to get right. But of course, it's one thing to say the right thing. It's another matter about what you do and what needs to be done here. Does there need to be codification? Does there need to be new legislation protecting rights here?
Many would say yes, and I'm open to that. But I really want to see it first because, any legislative response can have unintended consequences. Yeah. So you really have to be very cautious about it. But, the principle is that we've accepted things in this country for a very long time, and that is you have freedom of religion as long as you comply with our laws. And that means people can believe in all sorts of kooky ideas, and that's their business. So we shouldn't have the thought police involved in it. But equally, you should be right to, I believe, to say things that others find distasteful, that you don't like. They should be free to counter that in the court of public opinion, but you shouldn't be taken to a court or a quasi-judicial authority or some sort of government organisation, and it shouldn't be weaponised. And we've seen that with people like Gary Burns in New South Wales, pursuing Bernard Gaynor, the activist, on a whole range of areas. We've seen it with Archbishop Porteous in Tasmania, who has been pursued by one of the transgender Green movement. And we see it weaponised in the Parliament. I don't know how many times people are told to leave their rosaries off my ovaries, or condemning of people's Catholic or religious beliefs. But woe betide the person who says there might be a problem with Islam or Islamic Sharia law or something. They're instantly marked as a racist. It's full of hypocrites. It's full of self-serving arguments. And we need more people who are going to cheer on the principle. And may I say this? Mark Latham, there's an avowed atheist from the left of the political spectrum who's made this transition into the common sense area, defended freedom of religion on the principle the other day in the New South Wales Parliament. And I congratulate him on that, because he's not a believer, but he understands that if you rip away this foundational pillar, then a whole bunch of other things will come crumbling down as well. So it's not just unique to my political persuasion. It is an important thing that's recognised by those in different parties too.
Yeah, it's very important. Now, you're sitting, of course, in the city of churches, the paradise of dissent. Let's move on to the more mundane political issues. And Labor did have hopes of picking up a seat or two in South Australia, perhaps Boothby, where Nicole Flint sits on a small margin, and where your old mate Christopher Pyne has vacated the seat of Sturt, which has a larger margin of about 5%. But the latest polling suggests that Nicole Flint will hang on and that the coalition will hang on to Sturt, and Labor won't pick up anything up in South Australia. Is that your sense of what's going on there?
It is. It would surprise me if Sturt they didn't increase the vote there. I suspect that the new candidate
You're saying the
might
coalition increased the vote?
But in Boothby, I think Labor recognise that Boothby is always going to be that, that apple on the far side of the tree they can never quite reach. And Nicole Flint has worked pretty hard. They've run a pretty serious campaign against her, I have to say. But she's worked hard there representing community organisations and groups. And I hope to see her get over the line because I think she's important in politics. And when I was part of the Liberal Party, I supported absolutely her pre-selection, unlike the left of the Liberal Party, who, of course, didn't want to pre-select a woman at all. Once again, they were demonstrating hypocrisy.
She is a gun. She's worked very hard there. Just quickly, I want to clarify. You're saying you think the coalition vote in Sturt will be boosted by Christopher Pyne leaving?
That might be wishful thinking, but, had it happened before, I probably could have voted Liberal in Sturt.
Thanks very much for joining us, Cory.